my first love fell for the poor student my family was sponsoring. After high school exams, they planned to elope but got into a car accident on the way to the airport. The poor student died instantly. My first love lost his memory and forgot her, insisting he only loved one person, me. In the 3rd year of marriage, he took over my family's business, leading to its downfall. A blood debt has to be paid with blood. I was utterly hopeless and jumped from a tall building. When I opened my eyes again, I was back at 19. Back to the day Jack told me he had feelings for Amy. Amy, just one more kiss. Please, no way. In the dim room, Jack was holding the girl he adored, asking for a kiss. I stood at the doorway, a bit stunned. I hadn't expected to walk in on such a scene right after coming back. Amy looked up at me, clearly panicked. She quickly pushed Jack away and stammered, "Jane, I just got some dust in my eye," and Jack was helping blow it out. She was scared of me. After all, Jack was my first love, and he was very likely to become my fiancé in the future. And she was just the poor student sponsored by my family. I smiled slightly and closed the door. "It's no big deal, you guys carry on." Amy was so anxious she started crying. Jack hated seeing her cry, so he chased me down and pulled me aside. He whispered angrily in my ear, "Jane, there's no way I could ever like you. Behave yourself, and if you give Amy trouble behind her back, I won't let it slide." I looked up at him. "And if I don't behave, what will you do about it?" In my past life, I was a pushover. Jack would often give me attitude, knowing how much I liked him. This was the first time I talked back to him. He paused, glaring, "Then I'll never speak to you again." "Is that so?" I nodded, somewhat thoughtfully. "Got it." Jack and I had grown up together, and I'd always dreamed of becoming his bride. But he fell for Amy and would go to any lengths to be with her, even dropping out of school, going on hunger strikes, and threatening to die. Despite everything, the Smith family never approved of their relationship. Jack's parents insisted he marry someone from a background that matched theirs. Having no other choice, they decided to elope. It was raining heavily when they got into that accident on the way to the airport. Amy died on the spot. Jack got seriously injured and was rushed to the hospital. When he woke up, he'd hit his head in the crash, and surprisingly, he forgot about Amy. He insisted I was the one he truly loved. After he got out of the hospital, he pursued me relentlessly. He confessed 3 times. I refused him the first 2. I worried that someday he'd remember everything about Amy and resent me for taking advantage of him. On the day Jack proposed for the 3rd time, it was my 26th birthday. I was on a work trip in LA. He flew in, spending a fortune to set off fireworks at the harbor for me. "Jane, you always say I'm not in love with you. But after thinking long and hard, I want to tell you, even if I once loved someone else, now, the only person I love is you." The summer wind blew through my hair. He looked down at me, eyes reflecting the falling fireworks. By then, I'd loved Jack for 12 years, and it had been 7 years since that car accident. I'm not a greedy person. Allowing myself one indulgence shouldn't lead to disaster, right? With that thought, I let myself hold Jack's hand. Then he threw me into hell. After our wedding, our family's business dealings grew even closer. In our 3rd year of marriage, Jack urged my dad to invest in a piece of land. Once all our money was tied up in it, he told my dad the land was undevelopable. My dad had a heart attack he couldn't recover from. I confronted Jack, demanding why. He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes, "Because you killed Amy. A blood debt has to be paid with blood." I was shocked. Only then did I realize Jack had never lost his memory. He blamed Amy's death on me and had been lying in wait for years, deceiving everyone, just to avenge her one day. "Isn't your brother's baby less than a month old?" Jack lit a cigarette, glancing at me indifferently. "If you die, I'll let your brother's family live." How does that sound? I did as he wished and jumped from the building. As I was falling, a detail I'd overlooked suddenly came to mind. Amy and I share the same birthday. Those fireworks at the harbor years ago were never meant for me. After coming downstairs, I headed straight for the garden. It was the weekend. My mom knew I wanted to see Jack and had invited Jack's mom over for afternoon tea. My mom waved at me with a smile. "Jane, we were just talking about you with Mrs. Smith." I walked over and hugged my mom's arm. "Oh, what were you and Mrs. Smith chatting about? You've been praised." Mrs. Smith looked at me lovingly. "Our Jane's gotten even prettier. My son is one lucky guy." Between the lines, she had already assumed Jack and I had a thing. In the past, I'd have been over the moon. But now, I wanted nothing to do with Jack. "Mrs. Smith, you've got it all wrong," I said earnestly, meeting her gaze. "I just see Jack as a brother. I don't like him." Mrs. Smith was taken aback. She had always liked me, wanting me and Jack to be together. "Jane, why don't you like Jack? Be honest with me, did Jack bully you? I'll give him a piece of my mind." "No, not at all." I looked up and saw Jack approaching. I smiled. "Jack hasn't bullied me. I really don't like him, and with finals coming up, I just want to focus on my studies. Jack suddenly stopped in his tracks. He stared at me silently, eyes full of surprise. Jack and Amy had entered a passionate relationship. Even at school, they were inseparable. Everyone knew they were a couple. Thankfully, their grades didn't drop. So, the teachers turned a blind eye. I thought Jack and Amy were true love until I went to buy some study guides and accidentally saw Amy sharing an ice cream cone with another guy. He looked kind of familiar. In a suit, he seemed just a few years older than Amy. He asked her, "Does Jack's mom know about you guys dating? Hasn't she reacted?" Amy shook her head. Jack's kept it a secret from his mom. He said he wants to wait until after the college entrance exams to go public. The guy suddenly got mad and pushed Amy away. He sneered at her, saying, "After his exams? Once he's done, the Smiths plan to have him engaged to Jane. What about you then?" Amy didn't get angry. Instead, she carefully hugged his waist and reassured him, "Alex, don't be mad. I'll figure something out. I'll help you get everything you want." Alex, no wonder. No wonder he seemed familiar. I knew him from a past life. He was Jack's half-brother, raised in the countryside. Last time, Jack, with the help of my family, took over the Smith family company, while Alex, failing the power struggle, was kicked out of the city. I never imagined Amy knew him. Jack's first love didn't seem to care for him that much. I approached Amy, suggesting we team up. She didn't believe me, thought I was just causing trouble. "Jane, if you like Jack too, I'll keep my distance from him." I didn't beat around the bush and handed her some documents. After catching her and Alex together, I did some digging. Jack's dad was an out-of-towner who came to the city to make it big. Before marrying Mrs. Smith, he had another wife who bore Alex. To climb the social ladder, he divorced her and married into the Smith family. 6 years ago, Jack's father's first wife passed away. Before she died, she begged Jack's father to look after Alex, who had just gotten into college. Feeling guilty, Jack's dad promised to take care of Alex. After Alex graduated, Jack's dad, going against Mrs. Smith's wishes, got him a job in the family business. Amy grew up next to Alex, treating him like family, and was getting close to Jack for Alex's sake. Amy quickly skimmed the documents I gave her, her face drained of color. "What do you want?" I smirked, motioning for her to be calmer. "Don't misunderstand. I have no intention of hurting your precious Smith brother. I'm just proposing a deal." Amy glared, full of suspicion. I smiled faintly. "Take it easy. I've been annoyed with Jack for a while. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right?" To show my sincerity, I told Amy about Mrs. Smith's weekend plans. It wasn't long before Mrs. Smith accidentally ran into Jack and Amy on a coffee date while she was doing her usual spa routine. She made a huge scene at school, demanding they expel Amy. Of course, Jack wasn't having it. "Why should the school expel Amy because we're dating? I'm your mother." Mrs. Smith snapped back, furious. "What's her background? What's your background? She's got no good intentions getting close to you. The Smith family's daughter-in-law has to be someone like Jane, from a matching background. Marrying a commoner is just wishful thinking." With that, everyone looked at me. Jack glared too. "Figures, Jane. You ratted us out." I didn't even get a chance to deny it before Jack scoffed, pulling Amy to leave. Mrs. Smith slapped Amy hard. "You little minx, seducing my son." The slap was fierce, leaving a clear handprint on Amy's pale face. She didn't argue with Mrs. Smith but stood stubbornly, looking at Jack. "Jack, you're gonna let her humiliate me? Just because I'm not rich doesn't make you better than me." Jack was at a loss. "No, Amy, you have to listen." Tears welled up as she covered her face. "Forget it. We come from different worlds. Stay away from me from now on, and don't disrupt my life again." With that, she turned and left. Jack looked panicked, wanting to follow her, but Mrs. Smith's bodyguards held him back. Following my advice, Amy wrote Jack a letter. Mrs. Smith was determined to split up the couple, so Jack hadn't returned to class in days. After school, I went to deliver his assignments. As usual, he wasn't thrilled to see me. "Who told you to come? I don't want to see you. Get out of my room." Mrs. Smith looked worried, so I reassured her. "Don't worry, Auntie. Let me talk to Jack alone. I'll reason with him." Closing the door, I made sure to lock it. Jack looked disgusted and didn't want me near him. "Jane, no matter what you do, I won't like you. Give it up." "Shh." I hushed him, pulling a letter from my bag and whispering, "Lower your voice. I'm here to deliver a letter from Amy. She doesn't actually want to break up. What she said at school was out of anger." "You, doing a good deed?" Jack was skeptical, so I shoved the letter into his hand. "Open it and see for yourself." Jack recognized Amy's handwriting and read every word carefully. After finishing the letter, he grabbed my arm. "How's Amy doing now?" "Not so good." I frowned, looking distressed. "Everyone's gossiping about her, calling her a gold digger." Jack couldn't sit still when he heard that. I'm going to talk to my mom and get her to let me out. Calm down. I quickly held him back and tried to give him some advice. Jack, if you really want to go out, maybe you should just sweet-talk your mom a bit. Jack said nothing. He had always been rebellious, didn't know how to back down. I pointed to the letter in his hand. Don't forget, Amy's still waiting for you. Jack looked down, studying me for a long time. Jane, why are you helping me after I said those things to you at school? I forced a smile, hiding my disgust. Because you're my friend, and I believe you and Amy are true love. You guys can definitely break free from society's chains. Jack, don't give up. Jack was really moved by my words. Being just 19, he couldn't see through my 29-year-old acting skills. He looked at me, full of gratitude. Amy started studying at home, renting a place outside. She only came back to school for exams. Jack never went looking for her. Instead, he seemed to grow closer to me. Every weekend, he'd come over to my place. Mrs. Smith finally relaxed, thinking Jack had gotten over Amy. But she didn't know they hadn't broken up. Amy renting a place was actually Jack's idea. He was worried the rumors at school would affect her studies, so he had me find a place for her. These days, I've been passing messages between them. I told Jack about Amy's grades dropping. Her scores in the latest mock exams weren't great. I sighed, resting my head on my hand. You do so well in school. Your parents will definitely send you to Stanford. Amy's scores are so much lower. She can only apply to an average college at best. That means you won't be able to go to the same school. Jack said nothing, but his grip on the paper tightened. So, I added more fuel to the fire. Amy's so pretty. There'll be lots of guys after her in college, right? What are you going to do then? There's only a week left until college entrance exams. Getting a tutor won't help much, and you can't be like a novel hero and sacrifice your scores. Under my relentless goading, Jack's frown deepened. Finally, he made up his mind. Jane, I'm going to skip the multiple choice questions. What? I quickly covered my mouth, afraid he'd see my smirk. After a while, I spoke. Jack, were you joking just now? I'm not joking. Looking determined, Jack said. Compared to Amy, Stanford's nothing. I held back my laughter, subtly encouraging him. This isn't a small decision. Your family won't agree. You should think it over. No need. Jack, with his rebellious streak, hated being doubted. He shook his head resolutely, speaking with total certainty. Jane, I hope you can keep this a secret. Don't tell Amy. I don't want her to feel any pressure. I was secretly thrilled. I chuckled lightly, nodding in agreement. As soon as Jack left, Amy called to meet up. She brought Alex with her. He was still in a suit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze at Amy had changed. We went to a private restaurant. Alex had the waiter take Amy to choose ingredients, quietly steering her away. Only the two of us were left in the private room. Alex poured me a cup of tea himself. Jane, can you and Amy end your collaboration? What's the reason? Alex took a photo from his briefcase and handed it to me. I looked at it. A cold chill crept down my spine. Alex glanced at me, smiling casually. I was in LA last week for business and happened to see a fireworks show at the port. I thought it was romantic, so I took a picture. Jane, do you find fireworks beautiful? I frowned unconsciously. I don't like fireworks. Alex sipped his tea. Is it the fireworks you dislike, or the person who set them off for you? My hand clenched involuntarily. I don't like beating around the bush. If you've got something to say, Alex, just say it. Raising an eyebrow, Alex said, if I'm not mistaken, you're like me, a rebirth survivor. Half a month ago, Alex was reborn. In his last life, to get back at Jack's parents, he used Amy, which ultimately led to her death. After getting kicked out of the company by Jack, he got a terminal illness and died just half a year later than me. Driven by hatred, he didn't see clearly until Amy died that she was more important than power or status. Maybe his obsession was too deep, and that's why he was reborn. Alex looked at me, his gaze deep. After being reborn, I noticed some things were different from the last time, but I couldn't pinpoint why until I saw you working with Amy. Then I realized you were the reason things changed. This time around, you don't like Jack anymore. I took a sip of tea, bitterness spreading in my mouth. No matter how strong the love, it should fade when faced with a father's killer. When my dad had a heart attack, Jack was right there. He didn't help at all. He even tossed my dad's medicine away. Alex said nothing to that, just pursed his lips. I stood up to refill his tea. You don't want Amy to be at risk again, so you're asking me to stop working with her. It's not that I don't want to help, but you were reborn too late. She can't stay out of it now. You know how obsessed Jack can be. For the wind picked up outside. The wind chimes by the window started ringing crisply. Alex glanced at those wind chimes. What do I need to do to make you satisfied? I raised an eyebrow slightly. Talking to smart people is such a relief. If we can't stay out of it, why not ride the wave with me? Alex fell silent. It wasn't until footsteps approached outside the door that he sighed. You have to promise to keep Amy safe. I nodded with a smile. Don't worry, of course. When college entrance exam results came out, some were happy and some were sad. My scores were about the same as last time around. Amy performed well too. She could choose any top university in the country. But Jack was stunned. Because he didn't do the multiple choice questions, he barely made it to a bottom-tier college. Jack blamed me for it, asked why I didn't tell Amy the news before the exams. I looked at him innocently. You told me not to say anything. You didn't want her to feel burdened, remember? Jack knew he was wrong, grinding his teeth in frustration. Didn't you say her scores were only good for a local college? Her practice test scores weren't high. I scratched my head, sighing. How did she suddenly perform so well on the actual exam? Jack angrily stared at the report card, not sensing anything amiss. Truth is, there wasn't any extraordinary performance. This was all part of our plan. Amy's exceptional grades already secured a scholarship from the Smiths. Her low practice scores were intentionally controlled. Jack clenched his fists, glaring at Amy a short distance away. I cautiously tugged at his sleeve. Why not talk to Amy and suggest applying to local schools together? Jack hesitated a bit. Would Amy agree? Of course she would. I stated matter-of-factly. You gave up those questions for her. Encouraged by me, Jack regained his confidence. He marched off to find Amy, but Amy flatly rejected him. They had an intense argument. Jack, unable to hold back, revealed that he gave up his scores for Amy. He thought it would touch her. To his surprise, this self-destructive sacrifice earned him only a roll of the eyes. For me, Jack, I never asked you to do that. Stop being melodramatic. Who in their right mind would do something like that? Jack stood there, stunned. Everyone thought he was out of his mind, giving up his future for uncertain feelings. Once the golden boy, now he was a laughingstock to everyone. It delighted me. Amy eventually chose an overseas university. I only told Jack about her leaving the day before she left. When Mrs. Smith heard about Jack's stunt, she was furious. She ordered Jack to retake the year and kept him under house arrest. Jack, still fuming, just huffed when I mentioned Amy was leaving the country. What does it matter to me where she goes? I knew his temperament. It only took one look to know he was just pretending. I pulled out my phone and showed him a video. Jack's face turned dark after watching it. My mom confronted Amy. When did this happen? I pursed my lips tightly. Before the exams. Before the exams, I intentionally let Amy slip, letting Mrs. Smith find out about her secret relationship with Jack. Mrs. Smith flew into a rage. As I anticipated, she approached Amy, trying to pay her off to leave, but they didn't come to an agreement. In the end, Mrs. Smith threw a cup of coffee on Amy. To ensure Jack saw this, I had someone film it. She doesn't hate you. Her pride is just hurt. I earnestly advised, Jack, if Amy leaves and never comes back, won't you regret it? Jack gazed silently out the window. He didn't reply, but I knew he already had an answer in his heart. By evening, a downpour had started. I stood by the window, listening to the rain. Today was a special day. On this day in the last life, Jack eloped with Amy. But this time, Jack defied everything and ran away from home to try to stop Amy from leaving. The wind howled outside. The wheels of fate turned again, moving slowly towards the ending I planned for him. Just like before, Jack got into a car accident while rushing to the airport. I thought Jack would die. But unfortunately, luck wasn't on my side. Jack didn't die. He only lost a leg in the accident. Jack lost both his love and the use of his leg. Mrs. Smith dropped everything to care for him in the hospital, urging him to do physiotherapy. But Jack refused to cooperate. He declared that if Amy wasn't brought back, he'd rather remain disabled for life. With no other option, Mrs. Smith gave in. If Jack agreed to treatment, she wouldn't stand in the way of him and Amy anymore. But a new problem arose. After Amy left the country, she changed all her contact info, and Mrs. Smith couldn't find her. I waited a long time for her visit. She finally remembered our family had sponsored Amy and came seeking help. I feigned confusion. Didn't you hate Amy most? Why are you trying to reach her now? Not even a month without seeing each other. Mrs. Smith looked worn out with white hair. She sighed, looking exhausted. What choice do I have? I don't know what spell she cast on Jack, but he's insisting on finding her. Jack is my only son. I can't let him spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. I laughed coldly inside. Losing one leg isn't enough. Jack owes me 3 lives. Blood debts must be paid in kind. I held Mrs. Smith's hand and tried to comfort her, saying, "Don't worry too much. I have Amy's contact info." Together, we went to the hospital. Jack was just drinking water when he saw Mrs. Smith come in. He threw the cup in her direction and snapped, "Get out. I don't want to see you." I hadn't seen Jack for 2 weeks, and he looked so different. He was wearing a baggy hospital gown, and his face was pale with sunken eyes. He looked like a shadow of the lively person he used to be. Mrs. Smith teared up when she heard him yell, but fearing she'd upset him more, she held back her tears and gently said, "Please, son, don't make a fuss anymore. As long as you cooperate with the treatment, I won't stop you from being with Amy." Jack looked skeptical. "Really? What's your game this time?" "No tricks." Mrs. Smith hurriedly pulled me into the room. "Look, I brought Jane here. I'll have her call Amy right now." As she urged, I dialed Amy's number. After a short wait, a clear voice answered, "Hey, Jane." Jack immediately recognized Amy's voice. He stared at my phone like it was her. I smiled and said, "Amy, Jack's mom agreed to let you two be together. Jack wants to talk. Do you have a moment?" Amy laughed softly, "No need. Since the day his mom humiliated me with money, I didn't want anything to do with him. I just don't have feelings for him anymore." No matter how I tried, Amy wouldn't change her mind. I glanced at Jack in his hospital bed. He was looking up with red eyes filled with pain. Suddenly, Mrs. Smith snatched the phone from me. "Who do you think you are?" She had been holding back for too long, and once she started, she couldn't stop. "A nobody from nowhere. You come to the city and think you're a princess? My son likes you, that's your luck. How dare you act high and mighty?" Amy hung up, leaving Mrs. Smith fuming. "Son, now do you see? You'd die for her, yet she doesn't care about you. Listen to your mom, let her go." Jack glared at her, throwing whatever he could reach. "If it wasn't for you getting in the way, Amy wouldn't have left me. Why don't you just die?" Mrs. Smith was aghast. Tears in her eyes, she scolded Jack, "I'm your mother. How could you curse me? I did all this for you." I played the peacemaker, but inside, I wanted the fight to escalate. The worse their relationship was, the better for me. Mrs. Smith eventually left, leaving just me and Jack in the room. He held onto my hand like it was his last hope. "Jane, that wasn't Amy on the phone, right? It's just another trick from my mom?" I looked at him, feeling a twisted delight. Now he knew what it felt like to be abandoned. But this pain was nothing compared to what he'd done to me in a past life. I gently encouraged him, "Jack, just focus on getting better. Fighting with your mom won't do your health any good." Jack wasn't pleased. "Why are you taking her side? Whose side are you on?" "I'm on your side," I reassured him. Sneaking a look at the door, I quietly said, "But you need to get better if you want to find Amy, right?" Hearing this, his face softened, but soon after, he frowned again. "But my mom will never agree." "There's always a way," I told him confidently. "Heal first, and when you're ready, grab your passport, I'll handle the money." Jack looked relieved. "Jane, I don't know what I'd do without you." I gave a gentle smile. "You're my friend. It's what I'm here for." If fate let Jack survive the accident, I'd make sure he suffered even more. I'd let him see hope, only to snatch it away piece by piece. And in the end, he'd be consumed by despair. After that day, Jack calmed down for a while. He participated in his treatments actively. He stopped talking about finding Amy and even seemed to patch things up with Mrs. Smith. The first night he was back home, he tried to steal his passport. But what happened next was totally unexpected. According to my plan, I'd help Jack leave the country. It's easier to arrange certain things abroad. Once the money was sorted, staging an accident would be simple. I hadn't counted on Mrs. Smith being prepared. When Jack attempted to steal his passport, she caught him. They had a huge argument. Jack lost it and stabbed Mrs. Smith multiple times with a fruit knife. After a tough operation, she survived. But the police took Jack away. I immediately reached out to Alex, asking him to spread the news. He refused. "Why?" I asked, baffled. This was a golden opportunity for him. Once the news spreads, the media will dig into Jack's past, and Amy could get dragged into it too. Plus, Alex hesitated before saying, "Jack sent a message through his lawyer." "What did he say?" I asked, curious. "He said not to worry. When he gets out, he'll take you to the docks to see fireworks." A chill ran down my spine. Did that mean Jack was reborn too? Thanks to Alex, Jack's lawyer took me to see Jack. He looked calm, even in the detention center, not a hint of panic on his face. But when he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Jane, what are you doing here?" I couldn't find the words. I clenched my fist secretly. I was right. Jack had been reborn too. The look in the eyes of a sheltered youth and someone who's fought in the business world is different. Jack quickly noticed something was off with me. "Jane, don't worry." Luckily, he didn't know I was reborn. He thought I was just scared and softly reassured me, "Don't be afraid. I'll be out of here soon." I took a deep breath and told him I already called Amy. Jack's face immediately darkened. I hastily explained, "Don't worry, I just said something came up with you, didn't say anything else." "Don't bother with her anymore," Jack said, eyes deep and serious. "She's been colluding with that bastard Alex for a long time. We've both been fooled. Jane, I've seen everything you've done for me, only you truly care about me. When I get out, I'll make it up to you." "Make it up to me? He owes me 3 lives? How does he plan to make up for that?" My fist was clenched so tight, my nails dug into my skin, causing a slight pain. Leaving the detention center, I went straight to Alex to figure out a plan. Things were worse than I thought. Not only was Jack reborn, but he also knew about Amy and Alex. This was bad for us. Alex frowned. "Mrs. Smith is still in the ICU. She's too badly hurt, just kept alive by the machines, with no consciousness. Dad just submitted a letter of forgiveness to the police." I snorted. "Your dad's really willing to ditch his wife to save his son, huh?" With Mrs. Smith seriously injured and unconscious, they could blame her, claiming Jack's attack was an accident. As long as Jack showed remorse, he could get a reduced sentence or even probation. Alex chuckled silently. Cutting losses is his usual style. The aroma of tea wafted up. I lowered my eyes, picking up the teacup and taking a small sip. Whether it's a reduced sentence or probation, Jack would still have a mark on his record. If you had a way to keep Jack out of jail, don't you think his dad would be tempted? Alex looked up, surprised. "Are you suggesting?" I raised an eyebrow slightly. "In Jack's situation, he'd probably only get 3 years max. It's no big deal. Instead of stopping him, why not let him have what he wants and get him out?" Jack's dad used his connections to forge mental illness documents for Jack. The lawyer gathered a bunch of evidence proving Jack suffered severe emotional distress and a car accident last year, leading to serious psychological problems. The court eventually ruled Jack committed accidental injury and had dissociative disorder, lacking the ability to control his actions during the crime, so he didn't have to bear criminal responsibility. Jack was soon out of the detention center. To avoid suspicion, Jack's dad sent him to a mental hospital. I saw Jack the day he was admitted. He seemed in good spirits. He held my hand, pouring out sweet words. I looked at him silently for a while. "Jack, why did you suddenly change? You didn't like me before." Jack froze for a moment. "No, that's not it." He lifted his hand, gently brushing over my eyes. "I've always liked you. It just took me a long time to realize it. I know I've done a lot of crappy things that hurt you, but please believe me, once I'm out, I'll make it up to you. I'll treat you well forever. I won't let anyone hurt you." I opened my mouth, unable to speak for a while. I couldn't understand how he could be so shameless. Did he think being reborn erased everything he did in a past life? He only remembered me because Amy fooled him. There's no one more disgusting than him. I had no intention of letting Jack out of the mental hospital. Before he was admitted, Alex and I had a word with the doctor. We asked the doctor to keep a close eye on Jack. Jack's family wasn't short on money. The meds, the injections, nothing could be left out. My brother, when he's sick, always insists he's fine and refuses to take medicine. We have no choice but to trick him into believing the meds are sugar pills. The doctor understood and promised to take good care of Jack. Whenever I had the time, I'd visit him. His condition got worse, more like a true mental patient. Sometimes, he'd complain to me about sleepless nights, lack of appetite, the constant urge to lash out. Inside, I'd laugh quietly. The meds prescribed to him were actual patient drugs. Of course, a normal person would have side effects. But outwardly, I'd gently comfort him. "Just hang in there a bit longer. Your dad said once he finishes up, he'll take you home." In reality, that day would never come. While Jack stayed in the mental hospital, Alex stayed busy too. Jack's father was getting old. Recently, overworked, he had a stroke and became paralyzed. Now he's staying in the hospital too. As his legitimate son, it's only right for Alex to take over his position. But a few top executives had their own agendas, claiming Jack had a stake in the family business too and should make an appearance. Alex played along and took them to visit Jack. Jack lost his mind, but it didn't stop him from hating Alex. He pointed at Alex's nose, angrily calling him a bastard. The higher-ups heard this and thought something was up. Just as they began to smirk, a nurse came in to give Jack a shot. Jack, of course, refused to cooperate. "I'm not sick. I'm a reborn person. Let me out. My family's company needs me to take over." The nurse wasn't fazed and coaxed him. Okay, you take your shot and meds first, then you can go take over your inheritance." The higher-ups shivered and soon found excuses to leave. Alex wasn't in a hurry to go. He had some news for Jack. The hospital called him just now. Mrs. Smith suddenly took a turn for the worse. Despite their efforts, she passed away. Jack froze, his eyes instantly teary. He lunged at Alex like a madman, ready to bite a chunk out of him. As I stepped out of the elevator, I saw medical staff rush into Jack's room. Jack was strapped to the bed, unable to move his limbs, yelling, "Alex, you killed my mom, you'll die a terrible death." Alex scoffed, "Get a grip. You killed your mom yourself. Remember that night? You stabbed her 17 times. Jack went silent. His lips trembled violently, but he couldn't speak. Then he saw me at the door. "Jane," he looked at me with hopeful eyes. "He's lying, right? Everything he said is true," I told him, raising my eyebrows. "You killed Mrs. Smith." Jack's eyes seemed to shatter. I leaned down and patted his face. "Why the face? It's not like this was your first murder." The autumn wind blew in. He looked at me with sudden fear. "Jane, what do you mean?" I watched his panicked eyes, smiling softly. "I had a dream once. In it, you and Amy eloped and got into a car accident. Amy died. The brakes failed, but you blamed me for her death. To get back at me, you married me. You took over my family's business, caused my father's death, and eventually drove me to suicide. I fell hard, blood everywhere, hurting all over. I wanted help, but couldn't speak. I just lay there as the crowd screamed, my blood slowly draining out." Jack's pupils constricted sharply. He thrashed wildly, voice trembling, You were reborn too?" I shook my head. "You're really out of it. Reborn? That's fiction. I just had a dream." Tears streamed from Jack's eyes. I couldn't help but laugh harder. "Scary dream, huh?" I gently patted his face, soothing him. "Don't be scared. It's all fake. See, I'm here, standing right in front of you." The fear in Jack's eyes deepened. No, you must have been reborn." "Jane, listen, Amy and Alex tricked me. I didn't mean to hurt you. Let me out. I'll make it up to you," I asked, smiling. "Do you think I'm stupid? Fooled once wasn't enough. I'd fall for it again?" "Jack, if you even killed your own mom, why would I let you go?" Alex came over, asking if I needed privacy. I said no, I'm always upfront with allies. Jack stared at me in shock. You guys, that's right, we teamed up," I said calmly. "From the moment your affair with Amy got out, everything that followed was our plan." "Why? You used to love me so much." "Yeah, I did love him a lot. I married the guy I'd been crazy about since I was young. I thought he was a gift from above. He had stomach problems and was picky about food, so I taught myself to cook from scratch. I took care of everything for him, trying to be a good wife. But he killed my dearest family." I wiped away my tears. "Did you know? We had a baby once." Jack's head shot up. I couldn't help but laugh. "But you caused its death. The day you let my dad die, I was at the hospital. They told me I was 4 weeks pregnant. Why didn't you tell me? How could I? Or rather, did you give me the chance?" Jack's face turned ashen. He must remember now. The day I barged into his office, demanding why he'd ruined my family. He told me he never loved me, married me out of revenge for his first love who died. Pain filled Jack's eyes. After a few seconds, he said, "Jane, I messed up. I know I did. Give me a chance. Let's have another baby, please." I slapped him twice. "In your dreams, why would I have a child with you? You're never getting out of this room in your life." Jack begged endlessly. Seeing I wouldn't budge, his face turned vicious. "Jane, I'm your man. You can't do this to me. If you won't save me, I'll drag you down with me." I was done with his act. He was no longer a threat, just a fish on a chopping block. I smiled at him and said, "You're getting crazier by the day. I need to talk to the doctor about upping your meds." 6 months later, Jack passed away. The folks at the hospital said his condition just kept getting worse. He was adamant that he was someone reborn. Not just that, he claimed that Alex and I were too. Everything he said was true. But nobody believed him. So he really ended up being seen as a madman. One night, he jumped off the hospital roof. They say he had no fear on his face when he jumped, just pure joy. He even shouted out loud, "I'm gonna be reborn soon. Just you wait and see next time." I have no idea if he gets to do it all over again. What I do know is when Alex told his dad about Jack's death, his dad had a heart attack. But thanks to the doctor's relentless efforts, he pulled through. Alex said he did a lot of wrong in his youth. So he was destined to watch his loved ones pass away, which he thinks is the best punishment for him. What goes around comes around. He wants him to live long, with that guilt hanging over him for ages. On New Year's, our family headed to the harbor to watch a fireworks show. The fireworks were fleeting, but this time I had my family with me.